They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. Mine did during dinner, except I didn't die. I just realized my father never saw me as alive in the first place. I'm Nate, 34, the quiet one in a family full of loud achievers and louder egos. My dad Victor was a legend in his real estate circle. Charismatic, sharp-dressed, smooth-talking, he could sell a bird a cage. People loved him, strangers mostly, clients, colleagues, but never his own son. Growing up, I kept waiting for my turn. I brought home report cards with straight A's, fixed things around the house before he noticed they were broken. Landed scholarships he never asked about. Nothing was ever enough. Meanwhile, my little sister Ivy, 27, could send him a K-text and get a framed copy of it on his office wall. To be fair, Ivy never asked for his attention. Maybe that's why he gave it so freely. I tried. And trying, it turns out, is the worst sin in his book. When he announced his retirement after nearly 4 decades in the game, I saw an opening. My business custom smart home installations had finally taken off. I was stable, successful, and for once I had enough spare income to do something big. Not to bribe his love, I'm not that delusional, but to offer something meaningful. Something that said, I'm proud of myself. Maybe you can be too. He always joked about wanting one of those ridiculous SUVs with the gull-wing doors and massage seats. Said it was the only vehicle worthy of a real man. But he'd never buy one. Said he didn't believe in gifts that weren't earned. So I earned it. 3 months before his retirement party, I ordered the exact model he'd salivated over in magazines. Had it custom detailed, a ribbon as wide as my disappointment. I arranged for the valet to deliver it after dessert like a finale. The party was at this rooftop steakhouse downtown. Warm lighting, string quartet linen tablecloths, and enough Chardonnay to flood a boat. Everyone was there. My aunts, Ivy and her fiancé. Even my mum, still the emotional referee long after the divorce. Everything went well, for a while. We laughed, toasted, shared stories that skipped over the worst years. And then during dessert, I stood up. I spoke about his work ethic, his grit, his ability to build something from nothing. My voice only cracked once. I ended by handing him the keys. For all the years you drove the family forward, I said. Maybe now you can let something drive you. There was a pause. The kind of pause where hearts expect something back. He stood, glass in hand, smile on his face, but I've known that smile too long. To my son, he said, who thinks buying me a car will finally earn my respect. Then louder, that's hilarious. He sipped his drink, sat down, as if he'd just delivered a killer punchline. The table froze. You could hear someone's fork hit a plate. Ivy didn't even blink. My mum closed her eyes like she was bracing for a storm. No one spoke, they just looked at me, waiting. I didn't speak either. I stood, buttoned my jacket, walked out. I called the tow company from the valet stand and told them where to take the car. The valet looked confused until I handed him a $100 bill and said, "Don't worry, it's still a round trip." By the time I got home, the SUV was already in my driveway. It looked better there anyway. That night, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt clear, like the fog had finally lifted. The next morning, my phone had 17 missed calls from Dad. By noon, the count was over 30. Then Ivy showed up. No knock, no warning, just walked in, phone in hand, eyes wide. "You're not going to believe this," she said. I believed it before I saw it. She handed me her phone. It was a group chat, Dad, Mum, Ivy, and a few of his old golf buddies. A photo of my driveway. The SUV right there. Captioned, "Nate stole my retirement gift. Some people are just wired to betray their own family." Another message popped up as I read, "He's lucky I don't call the cops. But we need to talk, or this gets ugly." He followed the tow truck, Ivy said, sitting down. He waited outside the restaurant, then followed it to your house. He's been circling since last night. I wanted to laugh, but she didn't. She looked pale, shaken. "He says you're unstable," she continued. "He called Uncle Gary, said you snapped, that you tried to embarrass him in front of everyone, that you've been spiraling." I sat, silent. My dad, who forgot my birthday 2 years in a row, was now launching a character assassination because I rejected his public humiliation. But Ivy wasn't done. "He's calling people, your landlord, your accountant, even Mum's friend at the tax office." "For what?" She hesitated. "He thinks you're committing fraud. He's trying to get your business audited." It hit me like ice water. He wasn't angry. He was retaliating. I checked my phone again, voicemail from my office manager. "Hey, Nate. Just wanted to flag something weird. Some guy claiming to be from the IRS called asking about our client records. They knew stuff they shouldn't, sounded off. This wasn't about a car. This was about control. This was about a man losing his spotlight and trying to burn down the stage. But what he didn't know, I'd been saving the receipts. I opened my laptop, clicked on a folder labeled insurance. Inside were years of screenshots, texts, voicemails, old emails of him bragging about shady write-offs, enough to build a bonfire. I looked up at Ivy. If he wants a war, I said, then he's going to find out what losing looks like. And I meant it. Not out of hate, not even for revenge, just for the truth. Because I wasn't going to be a footnote in his legacy anymore. I was going to be the correction. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't, not anymore. It was the first time in years I felt completely awake, alert, like my body finally realized it wasn't being ignored anymore. By morning I had a plan. Not for revenge, not exactly. I didn't want to destroy him, I wanted him exposed. I wanted everyone who ever looked up to Victor Langston to see what I'd always seen. Not a legend, not a man, just a mask, polished, practiced, empty. The first call I made was to Liv. Liv's a forensic accountant I met back in college. She once caught her ex laundering money through fake charities and ended up turning him in. Now she helps other people do the same thing, only legally and with receipts. I sent her a digital folder I'd labeled contingency. She called me within 15 minutes. Jesus, Nate, she said. This isn't just shady, this is federal. Can you make a summary? Oh, I can make him sweat, she said. You want a soft leak or a nuclear detonation? Just enough to shake his world, for now. She laughed. Good, that's more fun anyway. While Liv built her portfolio, I made some calls of my own. Subtle ones. I left messages for people he used to work with, former colleagues, assistants, even his old mortgage broker. Casual tone, just checking in, wanted to see how they were doing. A few called back, a few didn't. One of them said something that stuck with me. I always wondered how you turned out normal. He used to talk about you like you were some mistake. I didn't even flinch. I just said thanks and ended the call. That afternoon, Ivy came back. She looked different, tired in a new way. She stood in my kitchen, scrolling through her phone like she was afraid of what might appear next. He's pushing hard, she said. He talked to Mum. She gave him the address to your P.O. box. I turned to her. You're kidding. She shook her head. She said he was just trying to protect the family. But it's worse than that. She pulled up a chat. A private thread between my mum and dad. Ivy had found it through a shared family plan that was still syncing messages. Rookie mistake. In the chat, my mum had forwarded copies of my business filings. Banking records, the address of my storage unit, things she only had because I'd trusted her once long before I knew better. But it wasn't just betrayal that hit me, it was the jokes. Still thinks he's in control of something. Let him feel powerful for a minute. It wasn't anger I felt, not even pain. It was something heavier. Like carrying a backpack you suddenly realize you've had on your entire life. She knew I whispered. All this time, she knew. Ivy just nodded. I think she always believed he'd break you. And that was acceptable. I opened another folder on my laptop. This one was titled Anchor. Inside was the deed to a small parcel of land, 2 acres of nothing, just pine trees and gravel, and a creek that barely whispered. It used to belong to my grandfather. Victor sold it when I was in high school to cover a business deal that never paid out. I bought it back 3 years ago from a guy who'd never even visited it. My dad didn't know I owned it. He also didn't know that to access his prized vacation home, the one he kept as a symbol of legacy and family honor, he had to drive right past it. I called the county office that day. Told them I was planning to build something on the property, a workshop maybe. Asked if I'd need to post any notices, especially since there was an access road involved. Only if your neighbors are going to cause trouble. The woman on the line chuckled. Perfect, I said. Ivy watched me hang up. You're going to build a cabin, she asked. I smiled. No, I'm going to build a wall. 3 days later, a shipping container arrived. 40 feet long, bright orange. The kind you see stacked at docks forgotten under seagull skies. I had it placed right at the curve where the private road kissed my land. Right where it would choke off the view from the main house. Right where he'd see it every time he visited. Bolted it down with reinforced anchors, sprayed it with sealant, put up a sign. Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted. Then I waited. Sure enough, within 24 hours he arrived. His silver luxury coupe spun gravel in my driveway like it was offended by the rocks. He slammed the door and stormed toward me. Golf gloves still half on like he hadn't expected to be walking into a war zone. You think this is funny? He barked. I said nothing. You're going to move it. I didn't blink. You're going to stop whatever this tantrum is, or I swear to God, or what I said calmly. That stopped him, just for a second. Then he smirked. You can't beat me, Nate. You don't know the rules. I wrote new ones. You'll lose everything, he sneered. Your reputation, your business, the respect of this family. Respect, I cut him off. That thing you use like a weapon. No thanks, I'm good. He stepped closer. You think this makes you powerful? No, it makes me free. He stood there vibrating with rage he couldn't use. Then he turned and walked away. Not a word. Not a backward glance. Just gravel screaming beneath his tires. I didn't follow. Didn't smile. I just stood by the container, my hands in my jacket, my breath slow and even. It was done. Almost. Because that night I got an email from Liv. Subject, final packet attached. The summary she'd created was brutal. Bullet points, bank records, timestamps. Quotes from messages I didn't even remember saving. She'd even found an old email chain between my dad and a fake consultant and LLC that never actually existed. I've redacted your info, she wrote. If this lands in the right inboxes, he'll have nowhere left to hide. I read the file, twice. Then I forwarded it. To the State Real Estate Board, to his country club's ethics committee, to the tax fraud tip line, to 3 of his former business partners who'd always suspected he left them holding the bag. I didn't add a note, didn't write a headline. I wanted the file to speak for itself, and it did. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus, one of his oldest friends. I knew something was off, he said. But, damn, you okay, kid? I'm fine, I replied. Better than I've ever been. And I meant it. Because I wasn't just taking back my name, I was reclaiming my story. One document at a time, I thought it would get quieter. After the emails went out, after the evidence was released, after the shock settled into silence, I thought maybe there'd be space, breathing room, a lull. Instead, it got colder. Not winter cold, relationship cold. Ivy and I didn't hear from anyone for 2 days. No group texts, no awkward voicemails, just this eerie hush, like a house right after the power cuts out. You don't know if the silence is peaceful or the beginning of something worse. Then Ivy called. You need to see this, she said. Her voice was tighter than usual. She came over within the hour. Not a knock this time, just a heavy presence moving through my front door like the wind had carried her in. In her hand was a folded piece of paper. Not new, yellowed, creased. She held it like it might burn her fingers if she gripped too tight. I was at Mum's, she said. She stepped out to get groceries. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just trying to feel normal. And then I saw this, buried under old tax forms. Hidden almost. She handed it to me. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My father's. All sharp edges and unnecessary loops. I unfolded it carefully. No date, no greeting. Just a first line that made my chest lock up. I never wanted a son. It was like a slap. Not the sting, just the surprise. That dizzying feeling when something hits you sideways. I kept reading. Boys grow up trying to replace you. They don't admire, they compete. Girls stay loyal. Girls know the power and where it belongs. A son forgets who gave him everything. The next paragraph had my name. Not lovingly, not even neutrally. Like I was a problem listed on a report card. Nate's always looked at me like I'm hollow. Like he sees through me. I tried to correct that, but he got quiet. Then worse, he got successful. He stopped fearing me. That's when I knew I'd lost him. I didn't realize Ivy had sat down until she spoke. There's more, but I didn't read it. I didn't either. Not then, not fully. I placed the letter on the table between us, like it was something I needed to keep at a distance, even though it came from me. From us, from where we were born and raised and made small. And still I didn't feel rage, not yet. Just something that felt closer to grief. Not the grief of losing someone. The grief of realizing they were never there to begin with. He wrote this, I said, voice dry. He wrote it and hid it. Like a future bomb. Ivy nodded. Like he knew he might need to prove it was your fault someday. Then it hit me. The line. The very first one. I never wanted a son. It was too perfect. Too polished. It didn't read like something spilled in a moment of pain. It read like something prepared. Like a speech. Like a weapon. What if this isn't real, I said. She looked up confused. I mean, what if this wasn't written for him? What if it was written for me or someone else to find? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My dad was always 3 moves ahead. A planner. A controller. He didn't react, he designed. His insults were never impulsive. They were crafted, tailored. He once told me the best way to win is to make them question whether there's even a game. Now I understood what he meant. This wasn't a letter, I said. It was a backup plan. I called Liv. Check the paper, I told her. Can you date it? She said she'd try. Ink, aging, paper stock, watermark, anything forensic. Ivy and I just sat there in silence for a while. I brewed tea. She didn't drink hers. She just stared out the window like she was trying to spot the next hit before it landed. Later that night, I got a message from Marcus. He'd called one of the other recipients of the file I sent. Apparently, the real estate board opened an inquiry. Quiet, but real. "You did it," Marcus said. He's squirming. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt braced, like I was standing in the eye of something still spinning, and then it spun. The next day, I got an envelope, certified mail. No return address, but I recognized the lawyer's insignia: cease and desist. He was accusing me of slander, of emotional harassment, of manufacturing stories with the intent to harm the public reputation of Victor Langston, a respected retiree. I read it twice, laughed once, then handed it to my own attorney, who skimmed it and chuckled. "He doesn't have a case," she said. "And if he tries to take this to court, he's going to be the one exposed." She drafted a response, short, sharp, legally bulletproof. I didn't even flinch when we mailed it out. But I did sit by the window that night, looking at the shipping container still resting on the curve of my land. Bright, loud, ugly, but true. It was a monument now, not to spite, but to survival. A few days later, Ivy texted again. I found something else, and this time it's not a document. She came by right away. In her hands was an old camcorder. One of those boxy early 2000s things we used to film birthday parties with. "I didn't know we still had this," she said. "But it had a tape inside, and I think you need to see it." She popped it into the adapter and hit play. What we saw wasn't scandalous, not loud, not obvious. Just a quiet family moment from 15 years ago. Me at 17, Ivy at 10, our mum off camera asking Victor to say something for the tape. He looked annoyed, waved the camera away, then said under his breath, "Why would I want to waste film on a kid who thinks he's better than me?" He didn't know the mic picked it up. He didn't know I'd ever hear it. But I heard it now. Clear, cold, casual. I paused the tape, rewound, played it again. That's who he'd always been, not a villain, not a monster. Just small. So impossibly small. That was the moment I stopped waiting for an apology. The moment I stopped asking why. The moment I knew this wasn't about making peace, it was about making room. Room for something new. Room for the truth. After that video, I didn't need more proof. I didn't need him to say it again or admit it outright. I'd heard it already in his voice, in his tone, in the space between words that always carried more weight than anything he actually said. He wasn't cruel by accident. He did it in small doses quietly, so you never noticed how much it was bleeding you dry, until one day you looked down and realized you'd been standing in your own ruin. And I had, for years, but not anymore. Ivy stayed over that night. She didn't say much, and I didn't press. We sat on the couch watching the kind of bad TV that doesn't require thought. It was silent comfort. The kind where you're not trying to escape reality, you're just giving your body time to catch up to your soul. In the morning, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, I think Mum loved us. In her own way." I looked at her. "But I also think she loved Dad more." That landed like a slow stone. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't the kind of love that looked obvious. Not hearts and flowers. It was a loyalty love. A loyalty that stayed even when the house was on fire and the flames were licking the baby photos on the wall. Mom always said she was just trying to keep the family together. But some things aren't meant to be held in place. Some things are meant to fall apart so better things can rise. I told Ivy I needed to clear my head. She nodded and left without saying more. I drove out to the land. The container stood firm like a sentinel, still there, still mine. But it didn't feel like enough anymore. Blocking his legacy was one thing, building my own was another. I stood there, wind brushing through the trees, and made a decision. I went home, pulled out the permits I'd downloaded but never filed, applied for a zoning approval, not for a workshop, not for a gate, for a garden. Not just any garden, a memorial. Not for him, for me, for what I'd lost in that house, for who I'd been forced to become to survive, for the parts of myself I'd buried trying to earn his version of love. The next day, the city approved it. Said I could start laying foundation and fencing as early as next month. That same week, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Mark Talbot, one of my father's former business partners. The one who'd vanished after a falling out, Dad always described as irreconcilable differences, like it was a divorce. Mark asked to meet. We sat at a coffee shop across town, neutral ground. He looked older, more tired around the eyes, but when he saw me, he smiled genuinely. "I heard what you did," he said. "The file, the board, the container. I raised an eyebrow. Word gets around fast. Faster when someone finally cracks the dam. Then he slid an envelope across the table. Everything I didn't report when I should have. I didn't have the courage. But after that letter you leaked, after that video, I remembered who he really was and how many people he hurt. I opened it. Inside were notarized affidavits, bank records, a log of internal messages, some dated back more than a decade. You sure, I asked? Absolutely, he said. He tried to erase me, but he can't erase the truth. That night I filed everything, sent copies to Liv, sent a new package to the licensing board, this time with attachments too big for email. The next morning it started. Not a storm, not a bang, a slow unravel. A contact of mine in the licensing office called to confirm receipt. This isn't just grounds for suspension, she said. This is criminal. Another call came in from a reporter who had heard whispers. I didn't confirm anything, just said all I want is for the truth to live somewhere besides inside me. And then Ivy called again. Check the group chat, she said. It had come alive. After weeks of silence, messages were flying. Mum asking if we could please stop all this chaos. Uncle Paul chiming in with vague moral wisdom like a failed fortune cookie. A few cousins weighing in with performative neutrality. But one message stood out. From Dad, I hope you're proud. You destroyed your own name just to get back at mine. I didn't respond, because I wasn't angry. I was clear. I sat down, recorded a short voice memo and sent it back to the chat. Some names deserve to be destroyed, I said. Because they were built on borrowed bones and lies passed off as heritage. I didn't break this family, I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. No reply. Not right away. Not from him. But Ivy messaged me privately. That was the first time I've heard your voice in that chat. And it sounded like truth. And it was. That weekend I started clearing the land. I wore gloves. Dug with my own hands. Marked space with ribbon lines and stakes. Not just for the garden, but for something more permanent. A plaque. I hadn't written the words yet, but I knew what it would say. Here lies the silence I was raised in. And here begins the voice I built myself. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want Dad to understand. I didn't want Mum to wake up from the fog she chose to live in. I wanted space. I wanted air that hadn't been filtered through their expectations. And now I had it. Every tree on that land felt like a witness. Every root a reminder that things survive even after they've been buried. Even after fire. Even after frost. Ivy came by to see the progress. She brought sandwiches. Sat on an overturned bucket while I hammered stakes into the soil. You know, she said, I used to think you were cold. I looked up. But now I realize you were just quiet. And I mistook that for distance, but it was survival. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She smiled. And this feels like something no one can take. She was right. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was creating. I didn't care if he ever saw it. I didn't care if he ever drove by again. Because what I was building didn't need his recognition. It didn't need his legacy. It didn't need his name. It had mine. I wasn't expecting anything to happen the day the audit letter arrived at his door. No headlines, no sirens, no drama, just a white envelope discreetly marked quietly powerful. But Ivy called 2 hours later. He's losing it, she said out of breath, screaming at the HOA manager. Something about conspiracies, sabotage, you ruining his life. I didn't even ask how she knew. When someone like my father explodes, word spreads on its own. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the land. I wasn't avoiding anything, I just didn't feel like watching someone drown in a storm they started themselves. The trees were quieter than usual. Maybe that was in my head, or maybe it was real. I was starting to learn the difference didn't matter as much as I once thought. The container was still there, resting on the bend like it belonged to the landscape now. But I barely looked at it anymore. It wasn't the monument I needed. It was the warning I left behind. I walked past it and stepped into the part of the lot I'd cleared. Fresh soil, survey lines, string tied between stakes. In my hand, I held a flat stone I'd chosen last week from a quarry on the edge of town. Not too large, just heavy enough to matter. I placed it where the plaque would eventually go. This was the beginning of something new, not built in response, built on purpose. That weekend, Ivy moved into a new place. No more family plan, no shared data, no group messages, just a one-bedroom downtown with plants in the windows and silence she controlled. I helped her move, no one else showed up. Not Mum. Not Dad. Not even one of those cousins who used to message miss you under her old birthday posts. But it didn't bother her. Not the way it used to. I always thought I'd miss the noise, she said, handing me a box of books. Turns out peace just sounds like space. She smiled when she said it. A real one. No shadow behind it. I left a small housewarming gift in her kitchen, something she'd once said she liked years ago, but never bought for herself. A vintage teapot. Forest green chipped on one side, perfect in its imperfection. Later that week, I received an email from the state board. Brief, clinical, powerful. Investigation formally opened. All files is under review. Contact expect Chris with such do so city RCIs do I forwarded it to Liv, to Mark, and to Ivy. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy called me directly. Apparently, Victor had filed a complaint, said I was harassing him, claimed the container was a deliberate attempt to provoke mental distress, said I was trespassing on his legacy. I didn't laugh. I thanked the deputy, calmly clarified the property lines, and sent scanned documents confirming the legal placement of every object on the land. He paused. I figured it was nonsense, he said. Man's been calling us twice a week, always someone else's fault. And just like that, it clicked. This wasn't a battle for him anymore. It was a stage. He didn't want to win. He wanted attention. He didn't know how to exist off camera, so I stopped being part of the show. I blocked his number, set up filters for his name in my inbox, told Ivy to do the same. We didn't speak of him much after that. Mum, however, found her way back. Not through apologies, through subtler means. She showed up at Ivy's apartment one Sunday with a pie she didn't bake, and eyes that looked like they wanted to believe they hadn't helped hold the knife. Ivy didn't let her in. She listened at the door, nodded once, said nothing. Then texted me a single word, enough. That same day, I was organizing my files when I found something I hadn't seen in years. A birthday card from Mum. Dated, generic, but signed Love Always. I turned it over. In the corner, almost hidden in the fold, were 4 words in her handwriting. Don't trust your heart. I stared at it for a long time. It explained more than it should have. Why she never stepped in. Why she smiled through insults and quiet bruises. Why she stayed loyal to a man who broke more than promises. She didn't just live in fear. She lived in distrust. And she passed it down like a family recipe. But I wasn't cooking with those ingredients anymore. I grabbed a lighter from the kitchen drawer, walked outside, and burned the card over my fire pit. No rage, no ceremony. Just the release of something I no longer had to carry. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt empty in a way that didn't hurt. The kind of empty that makes room for something else. That night, I drove out to the land one more time before the build started. The moon was high, clouds were low, and the trees whispered the kind of things you can only hear when no one's interrupting. I walked the full perimeter, ran my hand along the cold steel of the container, knelt beside the stone where the plaque would go. Then I planted the first tree. A white oak, strong, slow-growing, the kind that takes decades to reach its full height but never forgets how to climb. I didn't do it for show. No one was watching. I just needed something to stand longer than him. Something real. Something rooted. Something that wouldn't flinch when the wind changed. Back at home, I slept through the night for the first time in months. No texts, no dreams, no heaviness waiting on my chest. Just sleep. And when I woke up, the sun was in my window, the light clear and my breath steady. Not everything was resolved. There was still fallout coming. Still people who'd pick his side, not because they believed him, but because it was easier than admitting they were wrong. But that wasn't my weight to carry. That was the freedom. I didn't have to fix what they broke. I just had to stop bleeding for it. And I had. 2 weeks passed like a quiet tide. No new messages, no door knocks, no sudden storm, just the slow, steady settling of a story that no longer needed to be explained. The investigation didn't disappear. It moved underground paperwork, interviews, long silences followed by short confirmations. I wasn't asked to testify. I wasn't needed. The evidence stood on its own now. Sometimes the truth just has to be witnessed, not shouted. One afternoon, Liv called. He's officially under review by the board. Could lose his license retroactively. I didn't ask what that meant for him. I already knew. Legacy doesn't survive sunlight if it was built in shadows. I didn't follow the headlines. I didn't stalk his accounts. I didn't ask Ivy if she'd heard anything new. We both knew the less we fed the fire, the faster it would go out. Instead, I worked on the land. Not for distraction, for direction. The gardens started coming together slowly. Ivy helped. Mark showed up once with a pickup full of salvaged lumber and said, "Consider this a debt repaid." We built a bench near the oak I planted, painted it charcoal grey. Nothing fancy, but solid. The kind of seat that could hold silence without tipping over. By early summer, we'd planted lavender sage, climbing jasmine, and a single row of river stones, leading to the plaque I finally installed. The engraving was simple. This is where the wait stopped. Visitors didn't come often. That was by design. It wasn't a place for tourists. It was a place for return. One night, Ivy brought over dinner and we sat under the stars, bare feet in the dirt. Two siblings who had grown up in a house that taught them to swallow their pain in silence. "You know," she said between bites, "he might still try something." I nodded. "I know. But we're not scared anymore." That was the truth. Not a performance, not a pep talk, just something real we had arrived at without realizing it. We weren't afraid. We weren't trying to win. We had simply stopped needing their permission to exist. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the penmanship before I even opened it. My mother. The handwriting was softer than I remembered, less precise, like her hand shook or maybe her resolve did. Inside were 3 pages. Not an apology, not really. Just explanations. She said she didn't know how to choose between loyalty and love, so she chose the person who made the most noise. She said she stayed quiet because she thought she was protecting us. That if she buffered his anger, we'd get less of it. But silence isn't protection. It's just a softer form of permission. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't say I was wrong. She said I didn't know how else to survive. And maybe that's all I needed to hear. Not as a son. As a man trying to understand how people become what they are. I folded the letter. Didn't burn this one. Just placed it in a box with other things I now knew I could carry without breaking. That same week, the real estate board issued its decision. Victor Langston license revoked. Years of misconduct. False filings, unreported earnings, a pattern of manipulation. They didn't use the word disgrace, but it was there between the lines. Ivy read the notice before I did, texted me just 2 words. "It's done." And it was. Not like a gavel slam, more like a door quietly closing behind you. And you finally don't feel the need to look back. The container still sits on the curve of my land. I've thought about removing it, but I won't. Not yet. Not because I'm holding on to anger, because it reminds me of the exact moment I stopped being afraid of what would happen if I stood my ground. It reminds me that silence can be used as a weapon, but also as a shield. And sometimes it becomes a language of peace. I see Ivy more now than I ever did before all this. Not because we're trying to rebuild something broken, but because we're learning how to build something real. We laugh more, we cook, we plant things, we say what we mean. We don't perform. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not what we inherited. What we chose to become instead. She told me once, "You didn't tear the family apart. You just stopped lying about how it really was." She was right. Families don't fall apart when someone leaves. They fall apart when someone finally tells the truth. And if that truth burns the house down, maybe it was never built on love to begin with. I've stopped wondering if he ever drives by. Stopped checking if he talks about me to friends or tries to spin his side of the story. He can. Let him. Because you only need to defend your name when you're still trying to earn someone else's respect. And I'm not. Not anymore. The SUV I once gave him donated. Tax write-off. Used to buy tools for a school building project 3 towns over. That felt like enough. The land, still mine. Still quiet. Still growing. Last week I planted a second tree. Another white oak. Smaller but rooted just as deep. I didn't name it. Didn't give it meaning beyond what it already was. Because not everything in life has to be symbolic. Sometimes it's just a tree. And sometimes that's exactly what makes it sacred. I didn't write this to make anyone choose sides. I wrote it because there's power in speaking your story before someone else tells it wrong. Because some of us were raised in rooms full of silence that looked like love and learned too late that peace doesn't mean obedience. It means freedom. And sometimes the only way to build a bridge is to first let the old one burn. So here's to everyone who had to walk through fire to remember they could stand on their own. You're not broken. You're just not buried anymore. Story 2. This year, you will not be seated at the table. As she handed my brother his new car keys over Thanksgiving dinner, my mother exclaimed, all because I wouldn't pay back his student loan debt of $60,000. I simply put down my fork, grinned, and left. They discovered a closed garage and a notice of repossession when they awoke the following morning. I had no idea my folks could be that self-centered. Not to this degree. I didn't imagine they would put me in this situation, even though they had always preferred my sister Claire and showered my younger brother Ethan with affection. Not in front of the whole family, and certainly not on Thanksgiving. It was dinner time. The table was full with creamy mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce that still had the slight ridges from the can, and flawlessly cooked turkey. As usual, my mum had gone all out with every little detail, shouting ideal family vacation. I ought to have been more aware. My Uncle Mike was delivering a long, drawn-out narrative about his fishing expedition about the middle of the dinner. My mother cleared her throat. She produced a pair of gleaming automobile keys from her pocket. Her gaze briefly shifted to Ethan, who was occupied with slicing through an excessively dry piece of turkey for our boy. The shiny metal of the keys caught the gentle glow of the chandelier as she held them up for everyone to see. The one has a promising future. With his fork uncomfortably dangling in midair, Ethan looked up. Claire, my sister, was already grinning as she sat back in her chair. With a sudden emphasis on the label of the bottle, my dad filled out his wine glass. Half of the eyes at the table swung toward me. The implicit analogy lingered in the air. Ethan's cheeks flushed deeply when my mother put the keys down in front of him. He gave me a look that was obviously uneasy. This was not what he had requested. I was aware of that. He is a 20-year-old college student who is still figuring things out. He is not the issue. My mum wasn't finished, though. With a stern tone, she remarked, "This year, you're not getting a seat at the table. Intentional. Not after you turned down your brother's request for assistance." The room fell quiet. The only sound was my uncle's fork hitting his plate with a gentle clank. My face was flooded with blood. I didn't have to inquire about her meaning. My parents had indicated in passing a few months ago that they expected me to pay off Ethan's $60,000 student loan debt. Just because I had finally gotten out of the financial quagmire of my 20s, paid off my personal debts, secured a stable career, and purchased my first home. My mother had lost her temper when I told them no, that I couldn't and wouldn't shoulder that type of responsibility. My sister had grinned like she was watching a TV soap, while my dad had murmured something about family devotion. However, it was a new low. Ethan's face had become painfully pink. His eyes were filled with terror, and I saw it. None of this was what he had requested. With his gaze fixed on his dish, my dad swirled his wine as if the solution may lie in the glass. Claire was obviously enjoying the performance since she just crossed her arms. My eyes swept across the table. Uncomfortably, my Aunt Linda moved. My cousins. My grandpa only shook his head slowly, and Sam gave me a pitying glance. His lying face was marked with disappointment. The stillness was finally broken by Uncle Mike, who usually had the loudest voice in the room. "Hold on now." With a clatter, he put down his fork and said, "It's unfair. Jack is not liable for the debts of others." My mother narrowed her eyes and gave him a sour expression, ready to retaliate. "According to her, family members should help one another." She tightened her voice. "That's the point of this." My chest began to get hotter, that type that causes your heart to race in your ears. My chair's legs scraped the smooth wood floor as I carefully push it back. I glanced at Ethan, nodded slightly to let him know that it wasn't his fault, and turned to leave the room. The door was not slammed by me. I said nothing at all. As soon as I went outdoors, the chilly November air assaulted me. I'm breathing in harsh, stinging clouds. I didn't get much sleep that night. I repeatedly replayed the scene in my mind, each time growing more irate. I reflected on all the years I had prioritized my family, every sacrifice, the late evenings and holidays that were missed due to work. And they paid me back in this way, by attempting to embarrass me in public and make me pay a $60,000 debt. I had finished serving as their safety net by dawn. By the time my parents awoke, the world had begun to fall apart after I made a few calls and pulled a few strings. The garage door refused to move. Seized property was written in large red letters on a hefty official-looking notice that was slapped across it. It wasn't until my mum attempted to contact the dealership that they discovered their auto insurance had been frozen. In a panic. In my mind, I could see my mother standing in the chilly garage wearing her robe. As she tried to make sense of the confusion, her phone was pushed to her ear. Claire's perplexed, agitated voice can be heard in the background as my dad struggles with the remote control, still half asleep, to get the door to move. It was only the start. I thought the calls would begin early, but my mother's number didn't appear on my screen until a little after noon. I let it to ring. She phoned once more, and then my dad in quick succession, each call getting shorter and more irate than the one before it. More out of curiosity than anything else, I eventually saw the fifth try. "What's happening, Jack?" My mother's voice was loud and strained when she snapped. "Our garage is locked. Why? Our accounts are frozen. Why is this a cruel joke of any sort?" I stretched my legs out on my tiny used couch and relaxed back, enjoying the calm satisfaction that comes from a well-thought-out plan coming to fruition. "Mum, it's not a joke. It's business," she stammered, taken by surprise. "Enterprise. Your household. You can't just—" I interrupted her. "It's funny, I assumed that family meant respect for one another, not attempting to make your son seem bad in front of everyone, not treating me like an ATM simply because I've been able to organize my life." A lengthy pause ensued. In the background, I could hear my dad asking puzzled, muted questions, which just made things more chaotic on their end. But my mum, the control freak, must have signaled him to keep quiet, since she returned to the phone a bit later with a somewhat more controlled but tighter voice. "This isn't the way to do it, Jack. It's too much for you." I nearly burst out laughing. This was what she thought was too much, after years of going above and above for them following that Thanksgiving act. I forced my tone to remain even as I inhaled deeply. "You wanted to give me a lesson over supper, Mum, about support and loyalty. Think of this as my lesson to you. There are repercussions for actions." Before she could answer, I hung up. The repercussions extended over the following few days. They learned that a sudden and inexplicable audit had resulted in the suspension of their auto insurance, which was still listed under their joint business account. I may have contributed to that, relying on an industry buddy. A more intimate touch was the garage lockout, a reminder that there were still some cards for me to play. The family conversation erupted. Having always been the silent spectator, my Aunt Linda suddenly had it and blasted my mother for attempting to embarrass her own son in public. Uncle Mike fueled the flames by pointing out that my parents were the ones who needed a reality check. My grandparents reached out amid the confusion. They and I had always been close. Spending lengthy summers on their former farm is the only way to develop that type of relationship. Listening to your grandfather's tales of the good old days while learning to operate an antiquated tractor. When my grandma summoned me, her voice was forceful but gentle. "Your mother has been arguing with the family over you going rogue, Jack Honey. However, I've heard the truth. Don't allow them to intimidate you. You're acting appropriately." When he came on the line, my grandfather, who is a calm, stable person, didn't say anything. It's just gravelly and low. "Son, I'm proud of you." His brief words had more weight than my parents' 1,000 apologies ever could. I had an odd mixture of relief and eagerness as I hung up. I was aware that my parents would not compromise. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my footing and had a few more movements planned, even though I knew the storm was just getting started. After that first crazy day, my parents' calls decreased, but I knew them too well to think they would quietly back down. My mother could be seen pacing the living room. In one hand, she gripped her phone tightly. As she planned her next move, her immaculately manicured nails dug into the leather armrest. While everything was going on, my dad would be standing by the fireplace, whining back and forth like a sullen movie villain who is trying to figure out where he went wrong. Their reaction was swiftly effective. A few days later, my front door was ajar when I got home from work. My heart fell. My thoughts racing to the worst, I hurried inside, but nothing was gone. Everything was simply moved instead. Usually carefully arranged on my shelves, my books were heaped carelessly. My mantle's framed pictures were inverted. The contents of my desk drawers were spilled across the floor as if someone had been looking for something. My kitchen cabinets were open when I arrived. My drinks and plates piled haphazardly on the counter. But what really chilled me was the letter on my refrigerator. "Family looks out for one another. You'll change your mind." No signature. However, I didn't require one. I reached for my phone. Anger and disbelief mixed together in trembling hands, and called my folks. The second ring was taken up by my mother. Calm, even amused was her voice. Drawing out every word, she murmured, "Jack Honey. You've been home, I see." I saw my jaw getting tense. "How on earth could you damage my place?" "Oh," she said, almost bored. "Don't be so dramatic. Just a friendly reminder. Whether you like it or not, you are still a member of this family. You cannot simply cut us off with no repercussions." I forced myself to breathe while leaning against the wall and closing my eyes. I wanted to yell at her to release years of repressed rage, but I knew better. She broke into my homes and family because she lived on that type of disruption. I spoke in a low, hardly controlled voice. "It's illegal." She gave a little sarcastic chuckle. "Jack, stop being so theatrical. All we had to do was remind you of your origins." With my head racing, I hung up. She had gone too far too far. In an attempt to relax, I spent the next couple hours organizing my space. However, the anger was a harsh, icy weight that would not go away from my chest. Then right before I went to bed, my doorbell rang. My thoughts instantly went to the worst, and I froze. However, my parents weren't there when I answered the door. Ethan was the one. He seemed pallid. As he entered, his gaze darted uneasily. He looked over his shoulder as if he thought someone would pursue him. "I need to talk to you, Jack," he added hastily, his voice wavering. "Parents. They have another idea in the works. A worse thing." I shut the door after him. My thoughts are racing. I was prepared for a battle, but this was different. The situation was beginning to resemble a battle. Ethan was standing in my living room with his hands stuffed deep in his hoodie pockets and his eyes darting about anxiously as if my parents were about to barge in. I gestured for him to sit down, but all he did was lean against my couch's arm while tapping his foot nervously on the wooden floor. "Jack," he continued, "they've lost it." He spoke softly. His words came out as if he had been suppressing them for too long. "From Thanksgiving on, Mum has been on a warpath. She's discussing severing all contact with you. She even brought up selling her grandmother's old home, the ones she assured you of." My stomach grew constricted. The home was more than simply a piece of real estate. I had spent my early years there. I had learned the value of hard labor and loyalty from my grandparents over those summers. I also learned to drive my hands quivering while my grandfather patiently gave me driving lessons from the passenger seat. It was meant to be a part of our family's past and my heritage. I tried to stabilize myself by taking a calm breath. "Why, Ethan, tell me this? They don't precisely have you on their hit list." He cast his gaze downward. His shoulders drooped. "Since this is incorrect, you have greatly benefited them. For us all. You never begged for anything and paid for your college education. Because you established a barrier, they are now attempting to paint you as the antagonist." Something like pride flashed through me, along with a deep, smoldering rage. I didn't think Ethan would support me, considering how our parents had set us against one another. "Did they mention anything else?" With a tense voice, I asked. Ethan paused and rubbed his hands together, obviously having trouble with whatever was about to happen. "Whether you like it or not, they have been discussing bringing you back into the family company. Mum warned that they would make sure you had no option if you refused to play ball. She even discussed severing your business ties and using their connections to keep you out." My heart began to race. There was more to this than a family quarrel. This was an all-out attack. That's how desperate they are. With a hint of incredulity in my voice, I inquired. Ethan looked directly into my eyes, his face displaying a mixture of dread and shame. "It doesn't seem urgent to them. They consider it to be a lesson. Because you owe them for raising you, they believe you are being ungrateful." Before I could stop myself, I let out a bitter chuckle. The boldness. They continued to view me as a piece on their chessboard despite everything I had done to become self-sufficient. Something that can be manipulated and controlled. Ethan's foot continued to tap as his gaze fell to the ground once more. "I simply wanted to let you know. I do not wish to participate in this. I didn't request the automobile, and I most certainly didn't request to be a pawn in their schemes." I extended my arm and gave him a shoulder clap. "I appreciate you telling me, Guy, I know." Before making his way to the door, he gave me a little unsteady nod. He stopped and turned back to face me just before he left. "Just watch out, Jack. They are no longer being fair." As the door shut behind him, I collapsed into my sofa. His comments were weighing heavily on me. I had misjudged the extent of my parents' willingness to travel. The house break-in and the garage stunt seemed like desperate attempts to me. However, this was a very other matter. It's okay if they wanted to play dirty. I could do the same thing. I grabbed my phone and looked through my contacts till I came across my lawyer's number. The gloves needed to be removed. I moved like a man possessed over the next 2 days while I prepared. I would start a war if my parents desired one. however they believed they could intimidate me into submitting on my terms. Forced me to play the submissive son once more, but they were unaware of the lengths I would go to in order to preserve the life I had created. I started by locking down my company. I contacted my most important clients and discreetly transferred contracts and private data to an untouchable LLC I had established years before just for situations like these. I severed my parents' professional connections before they had an opportunity to do so, cutting them off from any professional relationships they may have attempted to sabotage. I then focused on the family company, which is the foundation of their wealth. Although my grandpa was the one who really constructed it brick by brick, my father had always been the public face. My parents hadn't even entered the picture for decades. My grandpa had never actually trusted anybody but me to handle the funds, but my mother had conveniently forgotten that in her rage. My grandfather and I met in his favorite cafe, the one with the greasy bacon and broken vinyl seats that he claimed kept his heart strong. He had already begun to wait. He held a cup of dark coffee. I slid into the booth opposite him, his keen eyes following me. His voice raspy and low from years of chain smoking muttered, "Jack, your mother is causing issues, I hear." Without trying to sugarcoat it, I nodded. After breaking into my home and destroying my belongings, she is now threatening to fire me from the family company. She's even threatening to sell the house you promised me, your old one. He let out a sigh. He gripped his cup tightly with his leathery hands. This is what I expected it to be. For her own good, she has always been a little too controlling. I lowered my voice and leaned closer. I need your aid, Grandpa. I cannot allow them to take away all of my hard-earned money. I refuse to be used as a pawn in their schemes. He steadied me for a long time by leaning back. A tiny smile of approval appeared on his face, and the creases around his eyes deepened. I wanted to know when you will confront them. You took too long. We developed a plan for the following hour. He explained the specifics in a firm voice. I had the patriarch of the family on my side by the time we left the diner. In order to exclude my parents entirely, my grandmother had previously discreetly changed the deed to her former home into my name. I got back in my car and called my lawyer one last time in order to make it very apparent that my parents would face legal action if they continued to abuse me. I had him create a restraining order. I mailed the documents to their home the next morning. I could see my mother's expression when she opened the heavy letter, her fingers shaking with the realization of how seriously she had misjudged. My phone buzzed as I was placing the envelope in my mailbox. Ethan had sent the text. "I appreciate you defending yourself, Jack. I agree with you. I'll take care of Dad and Mum." I leaned in my vehicle. A peculiar peace settled over me as the chilly morning air sharpened my lungs. The only person in this mess who had never once requested a handout, my brother, had at last found his voice. In this whole perverse game, it seemed like the first true win. A tiny contented grin tugged at my lips as I turned to go back inside. The entire table was turned against my parents since they had played their hand and failed to count on me. It was nearly over. The repercussions ultimately hit after a few days. Suddenly, my parents, who had always dominated the story of our family, were on the outside looking in. Since I delivered the legal documents, I hadn't heard directly from them, but I could hear rumors circulating among the family. According to my Aunt Linda, my mother had been phoning all of the family members in an attempt to get support, but the majority had already decided. Then Ethan texted me one morning. "Grandma and Grandpa would want you to visit. It's crucial." Even though the message was brief, I could sense its importance. Later that night, the crunch of the stones beneath my tires was both reassuring and menacing as I drew up my grandparents' long gravel driveway. Against the fading sky, their former home now in my name loomed large. Warm yellow light shone through the windows. It was like taking a car ride back into my early years, into a world that was both familiar and forever altered. Upon entering, I discovered my grandparents seated closely together on their worn-out couch in the main room. On the coffee table was a pile of large manila papers belonging to my grandfather. He wore his reading spectacles low on his nose. I got a tight, knowing smile from my grandma. Her fragile hands were clasped in her lap, and her eyes were somewhat hazy. Nearby, Ethan sat with his head lowered and his fingers tapping uneasily against his knee. As I stepped inside, my grandfather's piercing grey eyes met mine. He put the folder down and took off his spectacles gently. "Jack, have a seat." As a child, I would snuggle up in the same rickety old armchair across from them and listen to my grandfather's tales about the family company and the hardships he had endured to establish it. With my elbows resting on my knees and my heart pounding a bit more quickly than normal, I leaned forward. My grandmother's voice was calm, but laced with a profound, unsaid grief when she began, "Jack." After my grandfather cleared his throat, we had to make some difficult choices. He clasped his hands together. "Your parents no longer understand the values of this household. They've gone too far. I didn't think they would. Furthermore, I cannot allow them to further splinter this family." He stopped, the deep wrinkles around his lips becoming more noticeable as his jaw tightened. "We're going to cut them off entirely." I blinked. His remarks were like a strike to my chest, weighing heavily on me. I had anticipated conflict, perhaps a difficult discussion about familial allegiance. However, there was more to this. They have forgotten what matters. With a flicker of the fire, my grandmother's voice grew a bit louder as she went on. "I recalled from my early years, control isn't the point of family. It has nothing to do with power or money. It has to do with love, respect, and trust. They've also shattered theirs." Leaning forward, my granddad moved the folder stack in my direction. "We have made changes to our wills. We own the land, the business shares, and the house. You and Ethan will get all of it." With my heart thumping in my ears, I gazed at the files. This was not only a gesture. The power dynamics within the family completely changed as a result. My parents would be left with nothing but their pride, as they had dedicated their whole careers to running the family company. I had a weird, oppressive mixture of shame and relief, the sort that twists your gut and tightens your chest. "Are you sure, Grandpa?" I get by, though my voice sounds harder than I meant to. "You still have them as your children." His eyes had the steel of a man who had clawed his way up from the bottom, built an empire out of nothing, and never forgotten the price he paid. "The day they betrayed you, they no longer behave like my kids. What they become into is beyond my control. However, I can defend what I've created." Ethan moved around in his chair, looking up at last. "I warned them of this impending event. I'd like them to retreat, to honor your personal limits. However, they paid no attention. I tried to take it all in as I leaned back and ran a hand through my hair. It was like the last act of a play in which I was not aware that I was the lead. Additionally, the deed to this residence is being properly transferred into your name." My grandmother's fingers tightened around my grandfather's as she said, "Now it's yours. We have it in our hearts forever." There was silence in the room. The antique grandfather clock's gentle ticking in the corner was the only sound. The gradual, methodical end of a lengthy chapter is echoed by every second. My grandfather's shoulders sank into the couch when he finally sighed deeply. "Jack, don't allow them to entice you back into their games. Create your life. Personalize it." I stood with an odd sense of lightness. Like a burden I was unaware I was bearing had at last been raised. Their weak bodies were surprisingly powerful as they drew me in for an embrace. On my way back to my vehicle, my cheeks felt sharply chilly in the night air. For the first time in years, I felt anything. Real liberty. The sort that comes from finally escaping the bonds of guilt and expectation, as well as from having financial stability. For the first time in a long time, I grinned as I inhaled deeply, the cold air filling my lungs. Finally, I felt like I could breathe. Story 3. The fiancé of my brother grinned. "Oh, you're only a fallback option in case his actual job doesn't work out." The crowd burst into laughter as she spun the diamond ring I paid for. Except from me. Silently, I replaced my business card in my wallet. I exited the family group chat that evening, moved my assets, and gave my accountant a call. She opened an envelope with her name a week later. She discovered that the conversation had struck an uncomfortable law, the type that typically follows a poorly delivered joke. With a chandelier hovering over it like a costly threat, we were huddled around Megan's parents' enormous wood table, the sort that most likely cost more than my first truck. The discussion was carefully crafted to appear kind, but never intimate. The platters were too large and the wine glasses were excessively tall. Megan decided to attack just as I was cutting into my overdone steak. Leaning back, she turned the diamond ring on her hand casually with her manicured fingers. Luke claimed credit for the one I purchased. Megan had pushed my brother for a ring that genuinely shines, and it had cost me $12,000, a favor he had essentially pleaded for. Contrary to my better judgment, I'd caved in believing that I was only assisting him in purchasing some calm. "Oh," she continued, her voice breaking over the clatter of plates. "Nathan's just a backup plan." She looked at her mother, then at her father, who instantly smiled broadly and toothily. You know, her dad slapped his hand down on the table like a court pronouncing a decision and roared with laughter in case Luke's real career doesn't work out. Both of them smiled as if they had just heard the joke of the decade as her mother, who was already 2 glasses in, leaned forward to clink hers against his. Even Megan's younger sister, who had hardly taken her eyes off her phone during the night, smiled, her perfectly straight teeth gleaming in the light from her phone. Luke, who was seated behind me, simply went white. His jaw seemed to be twitching like he was gnashing his teeth as I saw his fingers tighten around his fork. He managed a wobbly, feeble laugh. The type you provide when you're in a tight spot. His gaze, however, was fixed on his plate. My own jaw tightened, my heartbeat accelerated, and my fingers touched my wallet, which had the fresh business card I had packed. I had intended to provide Megan's father with a proposal that would have reduced his operating expenses by 15% and provided him with a discount on the logistics of his small fleet. In actuality, it would have been a favor and opportunity to save his company from the steady financial decline. Through common acquaintances, I had learned about it. However, I now carefully retracted my hand, pushing the card more into my pocket. I took a leisurely sip of my wine, allowing the harsh taste to numb the bile rising in my throat, and just sat there, keeping my face deliberately blank. I excused myself after supper and hid before dessert. As I reached for my keys, Luke fired at me, ignoring the bewildered expression. The soft hum of the engine allowed me to reflect as I made my way back to my accommodation. I wasted no time at all. I started by calling my accountant and instructing him to transfer certain assets and freeze some accounts. I took out my phone and cancelled the shared card after that. I would stupidly let Luke to use it in an emergency. To make sure everything was in place to safeguard my company, I even left a discreet message for my lawyer. If, as I thought, this issue blew out. I grinned grimly as I finally logged into the family group chat, the same one where Megan had begun to make overt references to destination weddings and honeymoon destinations, complete with price tags that made my head hurt as I flicked my thumb. I departed from the gathering. More than I anticipated, the young Nathan left a gratifying message on the chat window. Megan opened the envelope with her name a week later. Megan discovered one beautifully composed letter on thick cream-colored paper inside the envelope. It was a bill. I had broken down all of the costs, including the down payment for the beach property they had reserved for their honeymoon. Although I was aware that she would be incensed, I also knew that Megan was the kind of person who couldn't help but read mail bearing her name, even if it appears dubious. I added a sentence at the bottom that said, "Effective immediately, the joint card has been closed. Kindly make the remaining payment within 30 days. Legal action will follow failure to comply." For the first time, I could virtually feel her well-groomed nails sinking into the paper, while her face twisted in that unique type of shock that people like her reserved. They're told no. She didn't get back to me for several days. Luke wrote me a few texts, most of which were unclear. "Hey, did you leave the family chat? Is common. The card didn't function," Megan added. "I choose to disregard them. Soon enough he would figure it out." Then my phone rang on the 4th day. The caller ID caught my attention. Luke was the one. After hesitating, I pressed the answer button and reclined in my chair while admiring the beautiful skyline outside my office window. His voice was strained when he said, "Hey man." In the distance, I could hear Megan's voice, a piercing, irate buzz that sounded like a bug in his ear. "Has the shared card been closed?" I waited for a moment. It was time indeed. He paused, presumably attempting to take in the directness of my response. "Nathan, what is happening on Megan is going crazy. She claimed to have received a bill from you." I tapped the edge of my desk with my fingertips as I leaned forward. Yes, I did. I decided it was time to make some corrections. The pause was long, the type that drags on and isn't comfortable. Megan's voice rose like a storm in the background, and I could hear it. Clearly, she was not accustomed to being interrupted. "Look," I said, interrupting him, "you requested my assistance with the ring." "Yes, I did. You requested payment of the honeymoon deposit from me." Yes, but Luke, I'm not your piggy bank. She has expensive taste, but that doesn't mean I can keep covering for you. He drew a long, tremulous breath. However, dude, you are aware of her personality. All she wants is good stuff. She is a part of it. Yes, and you're dying of it. Feeling my own fury rise, I fired back. When was the last time you made a purchase for yourself without considering her reaction? This cannot continue. Furthermore, I won't be your financial security net. Megan's faint screams in the background were the only sound to break the quiet for another moment. There was a bang of a door. Then Luke's voice returned more strained and quieter. All right, he murmured, his tone finally cracking slightly. I'll figure it out. Please don't do anything insane. Without saying another word, I hung up. I wasn't finished. I wanted him to suffer the consequences of his choices, but it seemed unlikely. He needed to see Megan now, for who she truly was. And I had a strategy to ensure that he did. The timing of the following punch was perfect. The chance merely fell into my lap after I had been sitting on it for some time, waiting for the appropriate time to twist the knife. My mother called me a few days later. She said in a worried tone, "Would you be able to visit this weekend? Mason Luke has to be discussed." I understood the purpose of this. I had observed the fissures developing. Luke had withdrawn from our parents and acted aloof, most likely too ashamed to acknowledge how far he had gone. My mother greeted me at the door when I got to my parents' house on Saturday. She furrowed her brow in concern. My dad was seated at the kitchen table, looking into the middle distance with both hands and a coffee cup, as though he was attempting to figure out a challenging arithmetic problem. After I left, Mum shut the door. Last night he gave us a call, sounded off. She paused as though she was trying to find the proper words. Screaming in the background was Megan. Nathan, I think they're in trouble. I inhaled deeply as that old rage flared up once more. It was one thing to bring my brother down financially, but I knew Megan was a problem. Making him a shell of his former self was something else entirely. I put my keys down on the counter and replied, "Okay, it's time for some action." Later that day I arrived without warning. Luke's apartment, that is. He had a messy hairstyle, black bags under his eyes, and a rough, unshaven appearance as he opened the door. It took me very little effort to get in. He staggered back and the door sprang open, obviously taken by surprise. "Hey dude, what is going on?" With a faint, trembling smile, he said. His eyes were constantly flitting to the closed bedroom door, and I could feel the tightness in his shoulders. Megan was most likely plotting her next outburst from the other side. Small chat didn't worry me. I took hold of his arm and led him away from the locked door and toward the living room. I lowered my voice. "Let's discuss now, Luke." Rubbing his face as if attempting to awaken from a nightmare, he slumped onto the couch. "Regarding the card, I promised to work things out." After taking out my phone, I swiped to a collection of screenshots I had saved specifically for this occasion. I let the first picture appear on my phone's screen after dropping it on the coffee table in front of him. The credit card statements were the ones I had taken out prior to severing the joint card. Luke leaned forward and sighed, his face growing paler with every word he read. He never disclosed that she would spend all of your money on designer purses, spa days, and VIP concert tickets, Luke. I spoke in a sharp, deep voice. Should I say my money until I shut it down at last? His hands began to shake as he gazed at the screen. I had no idea how bad it was. My tone hardened as I leaned in. Yes, it is. And if you keep your head in the sand, it will only get worse. She is taking advantage of you. And before you are 35, you will be destitute, divorced, and a shadow of your former self if you don't break it off. He appeared as though I had struck him. I nearly felt guilty. My pity evaporated, though, when I recalled how Megan had laughed that evening, her flawless white teeth gleaming as she made fun of me in front of me. As he massaged his eyes, Luke's voice grew ragged. How should I proceed? I inhaled deeply while squeezing my fists. Initially, you will chop them off. No more shopping trips or credit cards. You're going to quit allowing her to treat you like a child and start acting like an adult. He simply lowered his head into his hands and nodded. I feared for a second that he was going to pass out there, but suddenly Megan emerged through the creaking bedroom door. When she noticed me, her eyes narrowed. Her voice was brimming with phony happiness as she responded, "Oh, Nathan, I didn't hear you enter the room." I felt my heart accelerate as we locked eyes. I smiled thinly and narrowly at her. Oh, I was just in for a little family conversation. Felt that a clarification was necessary. Still shining on the coffee table, she froze, her eyes darting to the phone. Her well-manicured mask briefly slipped from her face as her jaw tightened, and then she pushed the charming fake grin back onto her face. Of course, she responded defensively, crossing her arms. Family is the most important thing. She didn't know what was going to happen. Megan stopped in front of the door, crossed arms. Like a cat that has just smelled something bad, eyes narrowed. She looked down at the coffee table's phone. Her eyes glowed from the damning images, and I noticed the first rift in her flawless exterior. I crossed my own arms, leaned back, and looked into her eyes without flinching. I made the decision to exert a bit more effort since the tension in the room seemed like a coiled spring. I was just reviewing some financial information with Luke. I remarked, sounding informal as though we were discussing the weather. Megan's mouth tensed. Her well-preserved grin faltered somewhat. Money-related issues. She made an effort to appear unconcerned, but I could hear the abrasive edge in her voice. Yes, I answered, meeting her gaze. For example, you've been lavishing him with expensive handbags, spa days, and other small indulgences that you've persuaded are essential to living a decent life. Her phony grin went a bit too far as she cocked her head. Nathan, that is what lovers do. They help one another. I laughed dryly and without humor. Encourage one another. Megan, you've ran my brother into the ground and made him into your personal credit card. Because you're out there treating every business like your own private showroom, he's barely able to pay his rent. Luke's gaze darted between us as his head jerked up. He had a pallid face. He still hadn't put everything together, but I could see that the shock was beginning to pierce the mist she had cast over him. Megan's heels clicked on the hardwood as she walked slowly and deliberately into the living room. She pushed herself up to her full height, straightened, and smiled at me patronizingly. Nathan, you don't understand. You have to pay for a woman like me if you want to keep her. That's simply the reality. My jaw tightened, but I forced a slow, sarcastic smile onto my face. Yes, Megan, I understand. You believe you have everything worked out, don't you? That everything will miraculously work out if you just keep using him and pushing him. Her confidence flickered back as she rolled her eyes. This was his choice. He was aware of the situation. I lowered my voice to a low, cutting whisper as I leaned closer. No, he didn't, but he will soon learn the truth. Megan squinted her eyes. She drew her well-defined eyebrows together. What is the intended meaning of that? In an attempt to control my rage, I straightened my fingers and clenched them into fists. It indicates that I'm finished. I'm done paying for your way of life. I've had enough of treating you like a gift, and I've had enough of seeing my brother perish beneath your foolishness. With his head still in his hands, Luke made a little choking sound. I just saw a glimpse of genuine terror in Megan's eyes as they dart to his and her face tightens. She may genuinely lose control. She was starting to understand. I waited for a while more, allowing her to perspire, and then I stepped back. By the way, you might want to see how your parents are doing. I spoke in a purposefully informal tone. Soon they ought to get a small surprise in the mail. Something to tell kids that money isn't something that just happens. Her flawlessly manicured lips pouted a little as the wheels in her brain started turning, and I could see the color draining from her cheeks. I pivoted on my heel and made my way to the door without saying another word. I stopped long enough to glance over my shoulder and saw the expression of unadulterated terror that had finally crept into her routine. Calm as ice. And Megan too. With my hand on the doorknob, I added, "While you can make the most of your remaining credit cards, I'm going to shut you off now. Greetings from the real world." I let the door crash behind me as I went outdoors. As I made my way to my car, the cold fall there struck my face and let me let go of the remainder of my rage. I backed away without turning around, but I could practically feel the fire of her rage blazing through the walls behind me. Luke's window was partially obscured by the blinds when I caught a peek of it. Slumping on the couch was his shadow. I inhaled deeply, allowing the contentment to seep into my bones. I wasn't finished yet, by no means. I didn't anticipate the repercussions. My phone buzzed during a meeting with my operations manager 3 days after my brief altercation with Megan. I glanced at the screen. It was my father. During work hours, he seldom interrupted me unless it was an urgent matter, so I promptly excused myself and moved into the corridor. Dad. Holding the phone to my ear, I said. His voice was clipped and tight, as it often was when he was attempting to control his fury. You might wish to see the house, Nathan. Megan's parents recently paid us a visit. A chilly, resentful smile appeared on my face. What my small present was not well received by them. He laughed harshly and without amusement. Yes, they enjoyed it just as much as I had anticipated. An hour ago, they barged in and demanded to know why you were severing their future daughter-in-law's support. Their mother nearly hurled a vase in their direction. I laughed as I imagined my normally composed, forbearing mother throwing a ceramic face at Megan's perpetually arrogant, excessively tanned dad. I'm en route. 20 minutes later, Megan's parents' SUV was parked at an odd angle as I came into their driveway, as though they hadn't bothered to tidy it because they were too upset. After taking a deep breath and allowing the crisp autumn air to soothe my worries, I made my way to the front door. In the living room, I discovered them. Tom, Megan's father, was pacing the floor like a lion in a cage. He had a deep, angry red face. Linda, her mother, was sitting on the edge of the couch with her fingers tucked into her high-end handbag as though she was worried someone might try to steal it. My dad reclined against the wall, his arms folded, observing the situation as my mum sat rigidly in her favorite chair, Josette's arms crossed. As soon as I entered, Tom's head turned abruptly. Like a hawk detecting a rat, his gaze was locked on me. You, he stabbed me with a finger as he spat. Do you believe you're accomplishing something, mailing us these absurd invoices and severing Megan's cards? I took my time, put my phone in my pocket, and let the door swing shut behind me. Just paying off some debts? I responded, maintaining a purposefully composed tone. I've made the decision to quit supporting your daughter's extravagant lifestyle, since she has been misusing my brother's money like a drunken heiress. With a shrill, gasping sound, Linda clutched her pearls in a way that, if not so tight, would have been amusing. Her voice trembling with anger, she said, "She's your future sister-in-law. Unlike some, you can't just cut her off." Her immaculately manicured fingers trembled as she searched for the phrase, "freeloaders." I raised an eyebrow in offer, because she is just that. Tom stepped forward, his jaw clenched so tightly that I could feel the tension on his neck's tendons. "You little punk, pay attention." Pointing a big, hard finger at me, he snarled, "You have no right to dictate to my daughter how she should live. It is your brother's issue, not yours, whether he can afford her way of life." Anger flashed through me, but I smothered it, maintaining a very neutral appearance. It's actually my fault. When she lives like a reality TV star, by using my money, my contacts, and my family's tolerance. I take a step toward him and look him in the eye. I'm finished. Tom, the joint account has been terminated and the cards have been cut, and your daughter is welcome to come talk to me directly if she has an issue with it, rather than sending you both to my parents' living room to have a tantrum. Tom's expression grew glum. At his sides, his hands balled into fists. My father's eyes narrowed as I watched him shift slightly, prepared to step in if things became physical. But with a quick, angry gasp, Linda beat him to it. "This is something you will regret." Her voice trembled with barely controlled anger as she snapped. "Do you believe you can simply ignore her and go on, 'Nathan, we're connected'? Strong companions. This will cost you money." I leaned a bit closer and grinned. "Bring her." My voice was icy and low as I whispered, "I hope you give it a go." Tom took his wife by the arm and almost pulled her to the door after they had been staring at me for a while, their eyes flaming with hardly restrained wrath. I saw them leave. For a long time, the picture frames on the wall were rattled by the sound of the front door slamming behind them. There was silence in the room. My mother's steady, slow breathing as she attempted to relax was the only sound. At last, my father relaxed his shoulders and exhaled slowly. "Well," he continued, his normally austere look somewhat softened by a smile, "that I believe went better than anticipated." As the adrenaline began to fade, I laughed and rubbed the back of my neck. "Yes, but I have a feeling that this isn't the end." I saw Tom's SUV emerge from the driveway, leaving a trail of dust behind it as I peered out the front window. No, this was by no means finished, and I suspected that the following round would be a catastrophe. After 2 weeks, Megan's stillness seemed almost too wonderful to be true. However, I was aware that it wouldn't last. Individuals like her don't simply vanish. On a Wednesday morning, the storm struck, halfway through going over a new partnership proposal. At my office, my phone buzzed and Luke called. My finger lingered over the screen as I paused. Although I was tempted to leave it on voicemail, I had a gut feeling that this was the time I had been waiting for. To accept, I swipe. "Hey," he murmured, in a rough, strained voice. He was at a diner and I could hear the slight clatter of dishes in the background. "Is it possible for us to meet? I must speak." I accepted, and we decided on a tiny, peaceful pub close to my workplace. The sort of setting where the music was low enough for serious discourse without asking questions. I saw him right away as I entered. His hair was a mess, his tie was loose, and he was slouched in a window-facing seat, sipping a half-empty glass of whiskey. I sat into the seat across from him, and he looked up. With a mix of embarrassment and sorrow, his bloodshot eyes met mine. Megan went out. He spoke in a flat tone as though he was still in shock. I sat back and arched an eyebrow. "Oh." He rubbed his hands together and laughed shakily and bitterly. "Yes. 2 nights ago she just left after packing. Stated that until I sort out my priorities, she would be returning to live with her parents." A glimmer of delight crossed my face, but I deliberately maintained a neutral attitude. "What are your thoughts about that?" He gave a headshake. His gaze fell to the table. "I suppose I'm relieved. I was hurt. Furious. I have no idea anymore. Although I feel like a weight has been lifted, I also feel foolish." I gave him a gentle nod, allowing him to speak freely and express everything. She insisted that not enough effort was being made. "I wasn't ambitious enough," he added, his hands closing around his glass, "and I didn't care about giving her the life she deserved. But I was simply drowning the entire time." She continued to behave as though I was the issue while maxing up my cards and emptying my accounts. With his head in his hands and his elbows resting on the table, he leaned forward. "I nearly asked Nathan to marry me. Like, really made a proposal. I was going to follow through. After letting it linger for a while, I leaned closer. However, you didn't. That's the crucial element. Before it was too late, you changed your mind." With a long, trembling breath, he slumped his shoulders. "Yes, without her, I just don't know who I am." She gave me the impression that I was nothing without her and that I needed her. The same rage sprang up again, and I tightened my jaw. "Luke, you don't need her. You didn't. For a short while, you just forgot who you were." He offered me a little sour grin as he glanced up, his eyes watery. "Yes, I suppose so." Neither of us said anything for a while. I could see the wheels moving in his brain as he gradually came to terms with the fact that he had been caught up in someone else's web for years. In the end, he extracted a little velvet box from his pocket. As he passed it over the table, my heart skipped a beat. His hand was trembling a little. His voice was hoarse as he replied, "I can't keep this." "You pay for it, I know. I swear I'll repay you. I will, but it could take some time." I felt the chilly weight of the diamond ring within the box as I took it up. I opened it, exposing the perfect, dazzling stone to the overhead lights. It was the identical ring Megan had noticed. The same one she twirled so cockily that evening at her parents' table. Without saying a word, I placed it inside my jacket pocket and closed the box. "Don't stress over it." My voice was flat as I spoke. "Just concentrate on rebuilding. Luke, you have another opportunity. Don't squander it." He nodded slightly, his gaze returning to his drink. "I'm grateful for everything, dude." I simply nodded to him in understanding, then got up and gave him a single shoulder pat. "Luke, be careful." I could feel the cool weight of the ring against my chest as I left. I basically undid everything, and it was a stark, pleasant reminder. When I got to the sidewalk, I put my hands in my pockets and let the crisp fall air blow over me. The ring's jagged edges were digging into my palm. When I inhaled deeply, the stress at last subsided. Even though it was done, my phone buzzed once more as I got to my car. I frowned as I looked down and saw the name appear on the screen. Megan. I saw the name flash on and off as I let it ring for a while. My hand was vibrating and buzzing. I hit block and put the phone back in my pocket without thinking twice. My heart was calmed by my jaw. I was determined to keep it that way. It was over.